Welcome back to Silicon Bytes, and this is a short reaction episode to the announcement by General Gerasimov of Russia that they show no intention whatsoever of discontinuing their war and aggression against Ukraine. Before we jump into that, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, all of those who like, subscribe, and add comments to the videos. It is a massive help, and I am extremely grateful for your support. Now let's jump into the story. Russia's Gerasimov confirms what was already obvious to many of us: its addiction to war, its refusal to relent, the relentless attacks, the hollow declarations, and the mocking strikes on Western assets in Ukraine that we've seen over the last week or so. Even amid diplomatic overtures, Russia vows to continue the war and embrace the imperial genocide that it started almost 4 years ago. Unfortunately, also on full display are American appeasement of Putin, political inertia, and Western hesitation. In a statement, Gerasimov emphasized the continuation of the special military operation. He went on to make statements, claim battlefield advances that have even elicited snorts of derision from Z-Patriots. It seems that the lies are so large and ludicrous that even these pushed the limit the willingness of the Z-Patriots to spread the nonsense of the Putin regime. Russia is carving a path of destruction that refuses to stop. How words from Moscow are hollow compared to the thunder of its missiles and drones slamming into apartment blocks in Kiev and other cities, and how Western dithering is empowering that aggression. Russia and Putin has never shown any sign of stopping or even wanting to stop. On August 30th, 2025, Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov bluntly declared the execution of tasks by the joint grouping of forces will continue by conducting offensive operations. Today we will clarify the tasks for the autumn period. That was re-reported in United 24 media. He claimed Russia held the strategic initiative and had launched striking offensives all spring and summer, striking 76 sites deemed to be strong for the Ukrainian military and important defense industry facilities. That's according to United 24 media. In another rebuke, he told Russian deputies the combined group of troops continues a non-stop offensive along almost the entire front line. At present, the strategic initiative lies entirely with Russian forces. That was reproduced by Reuters. It is, of course, laughable, and it has elicited hoots of derision, as I say, even from Z-Patriots. Russia says the quiet part out loud, says the Kiev Independent. War in Ukraine to continue, more mass bombings of cities. These are not the words of peace. Gerasimov put it plainly: no ceasefire, no halt, just continued bloodshed. His language strips diplomacy bare, exposing a regime that prioritizes conquest over any kind of coexistence with Ukraine or even with Europe. And the violence matches their rhetoric. In the days surrounding Gerasimov's speech, Russia launched a massive air assault, nearly 540 drones, 45 missiles, plus additional munitions across 14 regions, including Zaporizhia, Kiev, Dnipro, and Chernivtsi. This was reported in The Guardian. In Zaporizhia alone, one person killed, 24 injured, including children. Power to 25,000 residents was cut. Of course, Zelensky condemned it, as he always does, saying that it showed utter disregard for words. I think it shows disregard for humanity, for any civilized values, in fact. That was reproduced in The Guardian. The mass destruction of civilian spaces, yet Moscow hints it only targets military facilities. A claim starkly contradicted by witnesses to the damage, says Euromaidan Press. Well, we know that the majority of Russian strikes have nothing to do with military objectives. They are slaughtering civilians at will. That isn't accidental. That is part of the strategy. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz speaks bluntly: Russia must be economically and militarily weakened. The war won't stop otherwise. Also from The Guardian, Russia moves undermine peace. Europe accuses Putin of manipulation and prolonging the conflict. We know from other reporting that it is Putin who is trying to convince Trump that it is Europeans and Ukraine that are stalling and trying to undermine the peace. That is, of course, ludicrous. Unfortunately, those narratives seem to gain some traction with Putin, sorry, not with Putin, with Trump and his minions, such as J.D. Vance. After a deadly strike on Kiev, EU leaders, defense leaders, around 30 countries mobilize. They pledge stronger support. They want to increase the pressure, seize Russian assets, and open up the EU path to membership, bring clarity to that for Ukraine, so reports The Guardian. And the Kremlin has retorted. It responds, Europe is blocking Trump's peace efforts. Russia demands Ukraine show real readiness for peace. But Europe doubts Putin's sincerity. Well, this was reported in Reuters. Of course, Putin isn't sincere about peace, but now the strategy is becoming clearer. Attack and kill and slaughter, and then try to convince Trump that it's the other side that actually is to blame for the ongoing bloodletting. The Guardian warns Trump's willingness to entertain Putin's misleading narratives could pose a greater threat to Ukraine than bombs. European leaders, however, are waking up. It is still uneven, but they are waking up. Merz, Kallas, von der Leyen, Starmer, Macron, they demand more pressure, sanctions, and support for Ukraine. The Kremlin is countering with talking points, brazen lies, and of course manipulations, while Trump wavers, procrastinates, and sets endless deadlines that threaten nothing, result in nothing, and achieve nothing. Trump's ticking clock and the diplomatic dead end. The escalations arrived just before Trump's self-imposed deadline, the latest strikes on Ukraine, and his diplomacy hangs in limbo. Well, I don't think the outcome was ever really in doubt. As the Kiev Independent notes, Trump said, we will know within 2 weeks whether there will be peace in Ukraine. After that, we may have to take a very different tack. While they have Gerasimov's response in his ridiculous words and claims, they have Putin's response, which comes in the forms of missiles and drones. This deadline trains a spotlight on Trump's leadership, or the lack of it. Without substance or enforceable pressure, it's a countdown to more of the same, a fat, greasy nothing burger. Meanwhile, Europe moves to fill the leadership void, promising security guarantees, potential troop deployments, and $150 billion in arms funding, which is looming. Of course, some of that is being purchased from the US. Some of that is still contingent on approvals to allow Europe to buy arms from the US. But none of the discussions around a security and assistance force actually amount to anything if Russia refuses to end the hostilities. And of course, there's no sign of this happening or their intent to move towards this outcome. That was from the Financial Times. Diplomatic posturing by Trump cannot paper over Putin's aggression forever. The bombing of Western-linked sites and Putin's addiction to war. Well, Putin's bombing isn't limited to civilian infrastructure. It's hit Western-linked institutions over the last week. The Times reports over 600 drones and missiles struck Kiev, hitting the British Council and EU offices, killing at least 21 people, including children. Columnists argue bombing of Ukraine speaks louder than Putin's weasel words on peace. Europe and the UK accuse Putin of deliberate escalation. That's from The Times. EU defence ministers responded with calls to seize frozen Russian assets, bolster their forces, and hold Russia accountable. Words, however, as we've said so many times, have no deterrent power with Russia whatsoever. Striking Western diplomatic sites is, of course, obscene, and it is deliberate. It's not asymmetrical diplomacy. It's a brazen demonstration of war addiction and contempt for international norms. It demands a powerful strategic response. Whether that'll be forthcoming, we'll have to wait and see. The war isn't ending. not because of battlefield stalemates, but because Putin's calculus still suggests to him that he can win, however he chooses to find that. And that sentiment is channeled through Gerasimov in the statement that we've looked at in this episode. And we in the West have not done enough to convince Putin that that reality differs from his aspirations, or that we have the willingness to prevent him from realizing his aspirations. Putin revels in war and is dependent on it now, just as the Russian economy is. Gerasimov's words should not come as a surprise to anyone, unless, of course, they've bought into the delusion of a fake peace process.